Okay, so it's time to mod, but what do you actually want to bring into the game? If it's your first time modding, you need to make a sensible choice, I'd say. Best to choose a weapon similar to one that's already existing in the game, so that you have a sort of blueprint to work off of. As for me, and for this tutorial, I actually asked the Fallout 4 New Vegas team if I could model the hunting revolver as part of this tutorial. So the reason for picking a weapon that's similar to one that's already in the game is due to the bones. So bones, if you don't know, are to do with animation, and they essentially define the sort of pivot or origin point of each part of the gun. For example, the hammer, the trigger, the cylinder, if we're talking revolvers. And it's kind of important to get these to line up when you're bringing your weapon into the game. But we don't need to worry about that right now. So once you have an idea of what you want to do, it's time to start researching. A good place to start is, of course, well, at least for me, the Fallout wiki. The hunting revolver entry, this juicy tidbit down here. The hunting revolver is based on the Magnum Research BFR with elements taken from the Bison Bull as well. So I'm going to be mainly basing the model on this gun, the Magnum Research BFR, rather than the Bison Bull. So let's gather some ref. A good place to start obviously is Google Images. You want to make sure you're on large here, and you want to generally just grab stuff that gives you some good angles of the gun, ideally a side ref like this. And ideally with the gun pointing to the left, that will become, the reason for that will become obvious later. Also grab some references for the Bison Bull, I may or may not use them. Another good source is of course Hickok45, Gun Grandpa himself. Awesome videos, goes into a lot of detail for the feel of the gun, the sound it makes, that sort of thing. Definitely check him out. And then Pinterest if you need to top up your refs. I don't really like the user interface, it's a bit clunky for me, but it can be useful. So now that we have our references, we need to make our work folder. So, now that we have our references, we need to make our work folder. Here's one I made earlier. The first folder I made was the references folder. Popped a bunch of references in here. And here's that side ref that I'm going to be using the most from earlier. Also some mod ideas just early. I'll probably put more images in here later. Sequoia and the ammo the gun uses itself. Very important this for scale. You'll see why. So let's open 3ds Max. This is the first thing we'll see. Don't worry that I've already saved the file, or all I did was hit save. So I'm going to hit Alt-W, I believe it's that by default, to maximize the viewport. There's a few things we need to do in preparation before we do anything else. One of those is to check our units. So what we want to do is we want to go up to Customize, Unit Setup, make sure we're in centimeters metric, and our system unit scale is 1 unit to 1 centimeter. Another thing to take note of is this gizmo down here. We see that Y is the forward facing position in Fallout 4 for weapons. So we want our gun to be facing left. If we go into left view, you can see in the bottom right that the gun is pointing this way. This is why we need a side ref that's pointing left, which we're going to drop into the scene right now. So I'll just drag a plane out. I'll hide the grid with a shortcut. I'm right clicking these spinners to get rid of the segments on the plane because we don't need them. Right clicking spinners also works for position. It drops it to the minimal value. Here it's 1, here it's 0. I'm going to open the material editor and drag in standard material. This is going to be our reference material. So I'm going to apply it. Double click, go to diffuse, bitmap, and then our left side reference, and then we're going to hit this small bulb, show shaded material. Okay, so wow, we have our reference on, but yeah, what we need to do is we need to check the actual dimensions of the left side ref. Go to properties, 1000 by 346. So 1000 by 346, just ignore that it's centimeters. I get the feeling we'll have to scale this down a bit, so I'm just going to do that now. Now next, to be even more accurate, we're actually going to bring in a mesh from the game itself. So let's open Bethesda Archive Extractor. File, open file. So what I've got here is a shortcut file which goes straight to Fallout 4's data folder. I just dropped a shortcut where Bethesda Archive Extractor or Bay is installed, and I can just double click it and go straight to the data folder. So we'll find the Fallout 4 meshes BA2 because we want a mesh to reference. Select none, which so we're not extracting everything. Weapons, let's go for 44. I'll tick the folder root so we're selecting all of the NIFs. A NIF is a mesh file for Fallout 4. What we'll do is we'll go to our hunting revolver folder. I use these quick access links a lot, very useful. Let's make a reference meshes folder and then select that folder, which will extract. So it did it then, blink and you'll miss it. Go back to our folder, here's the new path. Now this is the path for the game, so meshes, weapons, 44, and here are our NIFs. So a good one to go for usually is anything with load on the end. That usually means it's a loading screen file. So I'm going to double click it, and this is NIF scope. So you need to install NIF scope and associate it with NIFs if you want to open NIFs like this. Yeah, this will work. So what we need to do is actually import that NIF now. But first I want to talk about layers. So let's get the Layer Explorer open. I used a shortcut for that. I'm going to collapse it to the left here and make a new layer ref. So layers basically hold the objects in the scene. If it's blue here, that means any new objects you create will go into the selected layer that's blue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this plane into the refs folder. And now, if I click the bulb, I can show and hide the refs. Let's rename it side ref. Now what I want to actually do is freeze it. So if I do freeze the layer, it actually goes grey. What I want to do is right click, go to object properties, and untick show frozen in grey. Now when I freeze it, it's fine. I can't select it, and it displays with colour. Okay, time for the game mesh. What you'll need is, you'll need the NIF plugin for 3ds Max. I'll link it in the description. So go to import. And then we can import the 44 load NIF. These are my settings. If you want to pause and copy them, be a good idea. Hit import and wow. I know this revolver's big, but not that big. Right, so what's happened here is, as we've imported the mesh, it's actually gone into the blue layer as expected. So what we need to do is, I'm going to select these new meshes, hit new layer, and rename it, and then drag it under the refs folder. Unfreeze the refs folder, and add the side ref to a new layer. Let's just call it 2D refs, and then drag that under refs. Bit complex, but all I've really done is I put this into its own layer, and I put the 44 into its own layer, so they can both be hidden and frozen independently of each other. So now that we have our scale mesh in the scene, we can scale our 2D reference to give us a better idea of how big the gun might be once it's in game. Lining up things like the trigger and the grip is a good idea. This thing is long. I want to get rid of this shadow, so I'm going to go to shaded mode, and that cleans it up just a bit. Okay, I want an even clearer view. I'm going to move the plane in front of the mesh and then actually change the opacity of the concept so we can see through it. Go into left view and then sort of eyeball it. Yeah, if you stare at it long enough you can kind of see how it's going to go. Looks good. So what we can now do is we can move it quite far back because we don't need it right next to the mesh. I'm going to max the opacity again and then freeze the layer so we can't select it anymore. I'm also going to move this 44 meshes off of the origin. As if I show the grid, the black line is the center. We want to be modeling across the center line. Okay, so here's a few more max tips. If we go to preferences, customize preferences, you want to make sure your scene undo levels is about 200. This means you can undo basically 200 times. Pretty useful. If we go to files, we've got increment on save. So if I save now, you'll notice it went from 1 to 2. This is useful, say, if you make a mistake in Hunting Revolver 6.06 and you can actually go back to, say, Hunting Revolver 04, export a mesh and import it into 06 in case you made a mistake. Just a contingency plan. Another good one is to go to Customize Preferences, Viewports, and make sure Backface Curl on Object Creation is ticked. What this actually does is hides the back face of a mesh that you've made. If you do this in your scene now and you haven't set that setting, then you'd see the other side of this plane. You don't really want that on because backface culling is usually the default for game engines and they won't show back faces. So it's less confusing for you to turn that option on because then you can tell where the inside of the mesh is and what faces are flipped and other things like that. Just for clarity. So, in terms of reference images, I have a program called Quadro, which lets me basically display them on my screen. Let's pick one out. I can scale it, hit F, and just place it on my screen. I have a second monitor, so I can actually drag it to the other monitor and be able to see them at any time, which is very useful. If there's one reason to get a second monitor, that's a pretty good one. So one more thing I forgot to mention, you're going to want auto backup on. These are my settings, so what this will do is it'll back up the file every 5 minutes and save up to 10 backup files. It'll just do this automatically in the background. You might feel a bit of a pause, especially if you have a big save file. So yeah, this will save you as well as iterative saving.